This is Michael Zürn, Alan Sanfey, and me, Tobias Debiel. We just had a discussion on trust and cooperation. It's a discussion which takes place in the process of the establishment of a new research center. And Alan, you are a cognitive psychologist working in the field of neuroscience. In how far does trust facilitate or hinder cooperation?
Well, what we're interested in our research is really looking at the individual basis of trust and cooperation. So we study people in very specific social interactions, and we essentially use trust as a kind of a proxy for cooperation. So we see how willing people are to trust each other and to what degree that trust is reciprocated when it's placed in others.
Mm-hmm. And can you give us a short example where trust plays a role or where trust doesn't exist?
Sure, we use a game called a trust game, which in which people are forced to give money to people. People are asked to give money to people, and with the prospect that some of that money might return. And we find there's various different determinants that relate to how much trust is placed. So, for example, simple facial attractiveness is actually a big predictor of trust. People who look nicer are typically treated better. So that's one example of a situation where trust is placed based on a slightly irrelevant characteristic.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. Michael, you're working at the Center for Social Science Research and you're a political scientist by training. Do these experiments help us if we want to understand international negotiations?
The typical answer of a scientist in this situation is yes and no. Yes, in that respect, that these new studies that we have here in the neurosciences, but also in behavioral economics, in a sense, conceptually enrich and support also other findings that we have already had in the field. And that is, for example, that cooperation is possible, that norms play an independent role and all that. But then again, there is a question of transferring those insights from the individual level to the level of institutional actors. It's true, individuals act in the name of an institution. In that sense, always individuals act. But maybe they act differently when they act for an institution, when they act as an individual. And if we take the example of trust, the problem that Greece currently has, that no one trusts that they will really implement the kind of measures they have promised to implement, is probably not a problem of lacking trust towards Mr. Papandreou, but it's a problem of lacking trust to the political system of Greece. In that sense, this example shows that this transferal is sometimes quite complicated.
Mm-hmm. Alan, just to pick up on Michael, do you feel that research on institutions is sufficient, or would you have any recommendations for political science research?
Well, I think Michael raised a really interesting point, and for me that was one of the most useful things from the workshop so far, is this notion that we may know precisely what happens when individuals interact, but as he said, sometimes they interact as agents. And I think that's something that we could indeed take to the laboratory, where people are deciding and trusting not for themselves, but as in response to for other people. And so I think that's a case where we can probably potentially bring the two disciplines closer together and study it in a more useful way for political science, and also in a more controlled way for neuroscience.
Mm-hmm. Thanks a lot. And Michael, do you have a final suggestion for neuroscience and for experimental research?
Well, go on. Try to enrich the context of your experiments, even if it may reduce to some extent the cleanness of the experiment, but I mean, you can clearly see that there is an attempt always to add up complexity, and to the extent that these disciplines add up complexity, and we, on the other hand, become conceptually more disciplined, we move towards each other, and that may be then a most fruitful exercise.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I hope that our little talk gave you some insights on what we are going to do in the beginning of next year. If you're interested in it, then have a look at our new center's website. It's the Center for Global Cooperation Research. See you then.